Hey guys, so today for you I have the maximum product subarray question, and in this question you're given an array of numbers, integers to be more specific, and you have to find the subarray with the maximum product. So in this example it would include all of the numbers, and the reason it includes all of the numbers is because it has an even number of negatives and no zeros. But that's just one kind of subcase. So to start off, you're going to set your negative value equal to 0, and sorry, let's see if that works. So put that at 0, your inner max at 1, and your global max, whatever the first element is. So in this case, 3. And then the reason you keep your inner max at 1 is you want to say, okay, whatever the next number is, I'm going to multiply it by my inner max. So if your inner max is 1, whatever you multiply, your inner max will be that number. So you're going to multiply your inner max by the first number, so you get 3. Compare your inner max to your global max. Your global max isn't less than your inner max, so it stays the same. And you don't really have to look at this negative value yet. So then you see negative 4. You say, okay, 3 times negative 4, that's negative 12. Negative 12 is less than global max, so global max stays the same. But then you want to keep track of this negative 12. So you want to put this negative 12 in your negative value holder. And the reason why is you don't know if there's going to be another negative value coming later on. And if there is another negative value coming later on, before you hit a 0 to be more specific, you want to keep track of this 12 because what you're going to do is you're going to start over and you're going to find the global max, you're going to find your inner max of like these 3 numbers. So you'll say, okay, 5, then you get 10, and then you get negative 20. But you're like, wait, I've already seen a negative number. 2 negatives equals a positive. So you're going to keep track of this negative 12 in case you hit another negative value. So when you get this negative value, you're going to want to set your inner max equal to 1 again, just so whenever you multiply by the next number, it'll become that next number. So then you hit the 5. You say 1 times 5 is 5, and 5 is bigger than 3, so now your global max is 5. And then you hit a 2, so you say 5 times 2 is 10. That's a terrible 0. And 10 is bigger than 5, so your global max is 10. So if you were only looking at the first 4 numbers, your max would be 10, the biggest maximum product subarray. And then you get the negative 2. So you see at negative 2, you say, wait, this negative value, it's not a 0, it's 12. So we've already hit a negative value before. So we're going to say, okay, we're going to multiply by this negative 2 and our negative value. So our negative value were these 2 numbers, if you remember. So we're gonna multiply by 2 and by negative 12. So we're gonna get 240. And we then compare that to our global max. Our global max becomes 240. And we want to set this negative value back to 0. So we know, hey, if there's another negative value, we haven't already seen a negative value. We have, but there's not a negative value that forced us to kind of reset that we could have used. So we're going to put that to 0. So in this problem, there were two negative values. And what we have to do, 2 negative values before there was a 0, there were no zeros. But what we have to do if there's an odd number of negative values before we hit a 0 is a little bit different. So I'll walk you through this problem. So this problem, it's essentially the same. You start off, your global max starts off at 3, your negative value starts off at 0, and your inner max starts off at 1. But you'll see in this problem, the subtlety that's a little bit different is there's 3 negative numbers. So we could either include the first all the way up to the last, but not including the 9, so not including the negative 9. So we can include the negative 2 all the way up to the negative 8, or we could include these 2 negative numbers and not the negative 2. So we'll see that what we did in the first situation, it doesn't really work for this. And I'll show you what we do instead. So I'll just walk you through this. So we get 1 times 3 is 3. Compare 3 to 3. It's not bigger, so that stays the same. Then we get the negative 2. 3 times negative 2 is negative 6. we say, hey, have we seen a negative value before? Nope. So we keep track of this -6. We put this back to 1, and we continue. So 1 times 5 is 5. 5 is bigger than 3, so our global biggest is 5. And we continue. So 5 times 4 is 20. 20 is bigger than 5, so we put a 20 here. 20 times -8 is -160. We say, hey, have we seen a negative value? Oh, we have. So we multiply by our negative value. So we say -160 times -6 is 600 plus 360, so 960. And then we put this back to 0. Then we get -9. So we say, okay, 960 times -9 is -8640. Whoops. So -8640. We compare that to our global max, since it's negative, so we don't really have to compare it, but we compare it anyways. We say, okay, 20 is still bigger, but we have to keep track of this -8640 now, in case we hit, in case we hit another negative value. So we keep track of this 8640, and then we make this 1 again, just in case there's no more negative values. We'll start over. Maybe there's a bunch of numbers after this -9 that'll end up being bigger than 960. And I forgot to say, since 960 is bigger than 20, we would have made our global max equal to 960. Then we say 1 times 9 is 9. 9 is not bigger than 960, and we're done. So if we did it this way, we'd get 960 as our global max. But we really should have gotten 12,960, so 12,000 bigger. So we got this answer wrong. So the reason we got this wrong is we used the first, all the negatives, since there was an odd number of negative values, and we included the first negative value and not the last negative value, when in fact we should have included this -9 and not this -2. So you have to keep track of how many negative values there are in a row before you hit a 0. If there's a 0, well, it kind of doesn't matter, because you can it doesn't really matter how many which negatives you use. Actually, it might actually. Well, anyways, well, let's see. So say we had a 0 here. Yeah, it doesn't matter, because even if we tried it out with yeah, so since if there's a 0 here, and then we had, say we had like another odd number of negative values, and we tried using these two, and we tried using these two, well, we'd find out that, hey, one of these two had the maximum using the first two. And then what we can do is we can reverse our array and put it through kind of the same kind of test that we did. So in this test, it would always use the last two. So in this test, it would use this number and the -8. So it would use these two numbers. And say there were 3 numbers, 3 negative numbers after this 0. The first time it would use this one, and the second time it would use this one and this one. So either way, you would compare the maximum you get going through this way with the maximum you get going through that way. And whichever maximum is bigger, that's the way to go. So this is still, you go through the list technically twice, but you don't always have to go through the list twice. What you can do, you could always just do it, or you can keep track of how many consecutive odd numbers before you hit a 0 are. So if there's any instance of consecutive numbers before you hit a 0 that is bigger than 2 in odd, so like 3, 5, 7, then you know you need to check the other way. You need to reverse it. So you can just create a global Boolean value saying like should retry, and you can originally set it to false, and then basically what you can do is anytime there's a 0, you what you do is you set your inner max back equal to 1, and you just kind of continue from there. But anytime there's that, you can say, okay, how many negative values have I seen up to this point? And if it's an odd number greater than 2, you can say, okay, I need to try the other way. And there's no other reason. If that happens once, you can do that for sure. There's no reason you would make that value negative. So I'll show you my Leetcode solution, which it has. So I have my global max here. You can see it's kind of long because I created a helper function where I pretty much just copy and pasted everything. But this is my original function. So I have like, if I need to repeat, what I do here is I copy over all the numbers in reverse order. And then I put it through, I say, okay, return whatever I got from my first function, the maximum of either that or whatever I'll get from my helper function with my reverse numbers. So if I submit this, I believe this is an optimal solution. And you'll see that I passed all test cases and I beat 100% of submissions. So this was pretty optimal. Thank you guys for watching. I hope you learned something. Let me know if you have any questions or if something wasn't clear.